The winter wind sliced through Meridian Pharmaceuticals' executive parking garage, carrying the metallic scent of snow and exhaust. 6:45 p.m. Rebecca Sterling's manicured fingers wrapped around the Tesla's door handle, her Hermes bag balanced against her hip, breath forming delicate clouds in the Colorado cold. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between concrete pillars where expensive cars gleamed like sleeping predators. Then chaos erupted. "Don't get in the car!" The voice exploded from the shadows like a gunshot. Marcus Webb burst through the service door, his blue maintenance uniform dark with sweat, work boots hammering against wet asphalt, eyes blazing with desperate terror. Security Chief Carter's hand snapped to his holster. Rebecca froze, her pulse spiking as she stared at the wild-eyed janitor who somehow knew her name, knew her routine, knew something that made him risk everything to stop her from driving away. His next words would shatter her world and expose a conspiracy that reached into the darkest corners of corporate America. Carter's weapon cleared leather with practiced precision, the Glock's matte black finish reflecting the garage's harsh lighting. "Step away from Miss Sterling. Hands where I can see them." His voice echoed off concrete walls, professional and deadly serious. Marcus raised trembling palms, his chest heaving from the sprint down 15 flights of emergency stairs. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the frigid air, and his work boots squeaked against the polished floor. Rebecca's mind catalogued details with executive precision. This wasn't random violence or a robbery attempt. The janitor's eyes held recognition mixed with bone-deep terror, not the vacant stare of mental illness or drug-induced paranoia. His blue uniform bore years of careful mending, and a photograph peeked from his breast pocket, creased from constant handling. "The car isn't safe," Marcus gasped, his voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. "There's a bomb. I know about the conspiracy, about what they're doing to your brother Ethan." Rebecca's blood turned to Arctic ice, her executive composure shattering like glass. How could this maintenance worker possibly know about Ethan? Her brother's participation in the experimental immune therapy trials was classified beyond top-secret clearance. Only 5 people in the entire company had access to those files. The pharmaceutical industry was ruthlessly competitive, but this felt different, darker and more personal than simple corporate espionage. Marcus's next words hit her like physical blows. "Ethan Sterling, 28 years old. Brown hair, scar on his left chin from a bicycle accident when he was 12. Immune deficiency syndrome patient. Test subject number 47 in the Y47 trial program." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting. "They're not trying to cure him, Miss Sterling. They're using him to perfect a biological weapon." The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of ventilation systems and the metallic tick of cooling engines. Rebecca's grip on the door handle tightened until her knuckles went bone white. Carter stepped forward, his weapon trained on Marcus's center mass with unwavering precision. "Ma'am, this man is clearly suffering from paranoid delusions. Standard protocol requires immediate psychiatric evaluation and possible criminal charges for threatening corporate executives." But Rebecca held up a trembling hand, her business instincts screaming that something was catastrophically wrong. Marcus Webb. She'd seen that name on quarterly payroll reports, but never connected it to an actual human being. 3 years of perfect service records, exemplary attendance, clean background checks, 0 disciplinary actions. Yet here he stood, risking his life and freedom to deliver information that should have been impossible for him to obtain. "How do you know about my brother?" Rebecca's voice carried the authority of boardroom negotiations and hostile corporate takeovers, but underneath lay a tremor of genuine fear. Marcus reached slowly toward his uniform pocket, movements deliberately careful under Carter's unwavering aim. The photograph he extracted was worn smooth at the edges from constant touching, depicting a little girl with golden hair and hollow cheeks. Her smile was heartbreakingly brave despite the medical equipment clearly visible in the background. IV poles, monitoring devices, the unmistakable sterile environment of a pediatric oncology ward. Hospital identification bracelet wrapped around a wrist that looked far too thin for a healthy child. "This is Chloe, my daughter. 7 years old next month if she lives that long. Same disease as your brother, same genetic markers, same cellular breakdown patterns." Marcus's voice broke completely on his daughter's name, years of suppressed emotion bleeding through his desperate composure. "They rejected her application for the trial program 6 months ago. Said we didn't meet the insurance requirements. Said we weren't the right demographic for their research parameters." His laugh held no humor whatsoever, only bitter understanding of a medical system that valued profit margins over human lives. What they really meant was that we weren't important enough to matter. Rebecca studied the photograph with growing horror, her throat constricting painfully. The child's eyes held the same determined spark she remembered from Ethan's childhood photographs, the same stubborn refusal to surrender to circumstances beyond their control, the same fierce intelligence that had driven her brother to volunteer for experimental treatment despite the obvious risks. "What does this have to do with my car? With some conspiracy about biological weapons?" But even as she asked the questions, pieces began clicking into place with sickening clarity. The late-night phone calls Ethan couldn't discuss in detail. The facility tours she wasn't permitted to join, despite her executive status. The medical updates that felt scripted and sanitized. "I clean the executive floors every night after the important people go home," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength despite Carter's weapon. "I hear things that invisible people aren't supposed to hear. See documents left on conference tables by executives who forget that janitors can read. Witness classified conversations because they assume we don't understand the implications of their words." He gestured toward the towering Meridian building behind them, its windows glowing like watching eyes in the darkness. "Level 15, Conference Room B. They meet every Friday at exactly 6:30 p.m. Dr. Cross, Dr. Martinez, and someone they call the coordinator, who handles external communications with government agencies." The timing hit Rebecca like a bucket of ice water thrown directly in her face. Dr. Nathan Cross's weekly briefings about Ethan's condition, always scheduled precisely during her Friday evening departures, always summarized in sanitized reports that somehow never felt completely honest or transparent. They discussed termination protocols for failed test subjects. Marcus pressed on, watching her face carefully for signs of recognition. End-stage procedures for disposing of human assets that no longer provide useful data. They don't use actual names during these meetings, just clinical designation numbers. But I've cross-referenced their files with patient records. Carter's patience finally snapped completely. "Enough of this paranoid nonsense! Ma'am, we need to leave immediately. This man is clearly suffering from severe mental illness combined with possible substance abuse issues." But Rebecca's world was already crumbling around the edges as horrible possibilities took shape in her mind. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, speed-dialing Dr. Cross's private emergency number. The line that was supposed to connect her directly to real-time updates about Ethan's medical condition. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then rolled directly to the same generic voicemail message she'd been hearing for the past several weeks. "Where is my brother right now at this exact moment?" Rebecca's question cut through the garage's stale air like a surgical blade. Marcus glanced nervously at the towering building, then back to her face, reading something there that made his shoulders straighten with new resolve. "Sublevel B3, underground research facility that doesn't appear on any official building blueprints. Restricted access requiring specialized clearance codes. No visitor logs maintained. No external oversight or regulatory compliance monitoring." The details were far too precise to be fabricated by someone suffering from mental illness, too specific to be lucky guesses by an outsider. Rebecca's mind raced through devastating implications at light speed. The building's sub-level facilities were classified above her own executive clearance level. Board members weren't permitted access without prior written authorization and armed security escorts. Yet Marcus, a maintenance worker earning less in a year than she spent on shoes, spoke of these restricted areas with intimate familiarity. "The trial results," she whispered, pieces falling into a horrifying pattern. "The optimistic progress reports, the encouraging medical projections." Her voice grew stronger as fury built beneath her corporate composure. "They've been systematically lying to me for months." "Not just lying to you," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "They've been using your brother as an unwilling test subject for something completely different from the approved trial protocols, something that requires specific genetic markers and pre-existing immune system vulnerabilities." He pulled a second photograph from his uniform pocket, this one clearly taken through a window or partially opened doorway. Medical equipment that looked more like torture devices, monitoring systems designed for data collection rather than patient care, and a human figure on a hospital bed, face partially obscured but unmistakably displaying Ethan's distinctive profile and build. The illicit photograph showed details that made Rebecca's stomach lurch violently. Her brother looked gaunt and diminished, connected to machines she didn't recognize from any approved medical protocols. This wasn't the cutting-edge treatment facility she'd been told about in glowing terms. This was something darker and more sinister, the kind of medical experimentation that belonged in Nazi concentration camps, not modern pharmaceutical research facilities. Tubes and wires emerged from Ethan's body like some nightmarish medical spider web. His skin had a grey pallor that spoke of systematic poisoning rather than healing. "Who else knows about this?" Rebecca demanded, her voice carrying the full authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers. Marcus's expression turned grimmer than winter stone. "Dr. Cross, obviously. Dr. Elena Martinez from the Immunology Research Division. The mysterious coordinator who seems to handle all external communications with government oversight agencies." He paused, studying her face with uncomfortable intensity. "And someone high enough in the corporate power structure to authorize black budget funding streams. Someone with unrestricted access to board-level financial systems and international banking networks." The implication hung between them like a toxic cloud of nerve gas. Rebecca felt the fundamental foundations of her carefully constructed world shifting beneath her feet like earthquake-damaged ground. Someone on her own board of directors was involved in illegal human experimentation. Someone she trusted completely had been systematically betraying everything she thought her company represented. Someone close enough to manipulate her personal decisions was using her brother as a laboratory animal. Carter's radio crackled to life with mechanical precision. "Security Chief Carter, please respond immediately. We have multiple reports of a significant disturbance in Executive Parking Level 1, possible corporate espionage situation requiring immediate intervention." The voice belonged to Central Dispatch, professional and clipped with military efficiency. Rebecca realized with crystal clarity that their entire confrontation had been caught on high-definition surveillance cameras, that somewhere in the building's security command center, people were watching this exact conversation unfold in real time, people who might be active participants in whatever conspiracy Marcus was describing. "We can't stay here another second," Marcus said with desperate urgency, his eyes darting toward multiple camera positions with practiced awareness. "If they realize I've made direct contact with you, if they understand exactly what information I've shared—" He didn't need to complete the sentence because Rebecca understood the stakes with horrifying clarity. Her brother's life hanging in the balance, Marcus's daughter's treatment being permanently denied. The possibility that Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the company she'd helped build from a small biotech startup into a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire, was conducting Nazi-level human experimentation directly under her executive offices. Rebecca made a decision that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her entire life. "Carter, stand down immediately." Her security chief's face displayed obvious confusion mixed with growing concern. "Ma'am, this individual could represent a clear and present danger to your personal safety. Standard security protocols require that we follow established procedures and—" "Stand down," she repeated, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of absolute executive authority that had built her corporate empire. "And disable all tracking systems on executive fleet vehicles, right now." The next several minutes unfolded with surreal precision that felt like watching someone else's life through bulletproof glass. Carter, despite his obvious professional misgivings, followed direct orders with military efficiency born from years of private security work. Rebecca's Tesla mysteriously disappeared from the company's comprehensive GPS monitoring system. Surveillance cameras throughout the executive parking garage suddenly developed convenient technical difficulties. Emergency exits that normally required executive keycard access became available to maintenance personnel with the right authorization codes. Marcus proved remarkably well informed about the building's sophisticated security systems for someone whose job description involved mopping floors and emptying trash receptacles. "How long have you been planning this confrontation?" Rebecca asked as they moved through the garage's hidden service corridors that she'd never noticed despite parking in the same location for over 5 years. Marcus's smile held no warmth or satisfaction, only grim determination. 3 months of careful preparation, ever since I finally understood what they were really doing to trial participants. Ever since I realized that my daughter's rejection wasn't about insurance requirements or demographic compatibility. The maintenance elevator descended past levels that Rebecca didn't know existed, despite her executive status and comprehensive knowledge of building operations. Sub-basement 1 contained mechanical systems and storage areas exactly as shown on official blueprints. Sub-basement 2 housed additional utility infrastructure and emergency backup generators. But sub-basement 3 didn't appear on any architectural plans she'd ever seen. Yet the elevator's control panel included clearly labeled buttons for levels that shouldn't exist, accessed by maintenance keycards that apparently possessed far more extensive clearance than anyone realized. "They've been using Meridian's legitimate research programs as perfect cover," Marcus explained, as the elevator hummed deeper into the earth. "Taking a carefully selected percentage of trial participants and relocating them to these sub-level facilities for what they call enhanced monitoring protocols. Their families receive regular updates about specialized treatment options, better medical equipment, faster therapeutic results." His voice turned bitter with suppressed rage. "What they're actually doing is studying accelerated disease progression without any interference from actual medical intervention or treatment." Rebecca felt physically sick as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. "You're describing systematic medical torture, deliberate murder of people who volunteered to help advance legitimate treatment research." The elevator stopped with a soft mechanical chime. Sub-basement 3. The doors opened onto a corridor that belonged in dystopian science fiction rather than modern medical research. Sterile white walls stretched endlessly in both directions. Harsh fluorescent lighting created deep shadows that seemed to move independently. The antiseptic smell of hospital-grade disinfectants mixed with something organic and fundamentally wrong. Marcus led her through corridors that showed no signs of regular maintenance or professional cleaning, despite his supposed job responsibilities. This obviously wasn't part of his normal work routine or authorized access areas. Yet he navigated the maze of hallways with practiced ease, avoiding security cameras with movements that suggested months of careful reconnaissance and route planning. "How often do you come down here?" Rebecca whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the sterile environment. "Every single night for the past month, learning the complete layout, documenting everything I've witnessed, building irrefutable evidence." They stopped outside a reinforced door marked with international biohazard symbols and alphanumeric codes that meant absolutely nothing to Rebecca, despite her advanced degrees in biochemistry and pharmaceutical sciences. Through a small reinforced window, she could see into a room filled with medical equipment that definitely wasn't part of any approved trial protocols she'd ever reviewed. Monitoring systems that looked more like military surveillance apparatus than healing technology. Computer screens displaying complex data streams that resembled weapons testing more than legitimate pharmaceutical research. And in the center of this technological nightmare, connected to dozens of machines by countless cables and tubes, lay her brother. Ethan looked nothing like the encouraging progress photographs she'd been receiving in weekly email updates. His face was gaunt to the point of being skeletal, cheekbones protruding sharply beneath skin that had turned an unhealthy gray color. His body appeared to have lost at least 30 pounds since she'd last seen him in person 6 weeks ago. The machines surrounding him weren't delivering life-saving medicine or therapeutic treatments. They were systematically extracting biological data while measuring physiological responses to controlled toxin exposure, recording detailed information about immune system collapse for someone's scientific database. Rebecca's hands flattened against the reinforced window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared at her brother's deteriorating condition. "How long has he been like this?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Marcus checked the digital display mounted beside the security door, reading information from screens that tracked vital signs and experimental protocols. According to their detailed logs, today marks day 163 of what they call enhanced monitoring phase. They've been sending you optimistic progress reports while they've actually been studying his systematic deterioration in real time for scientific research purposes. A new voice cut through the corridor's sterile silence like a surgical scalpel. Well, what exactly do we have here?" Dr. Nathan Cross stepped smoothly from a hidden side corridor, flanked by 2 security guards that Rebecca didn't recognize from her company's normal personnel roster. His usual warm, professional smile had been completely replaced by something cold and calculating that she'd never seen before. These weren't Meridian's regular security staff. They were obviously private military contractors with serious weapons and zero hesitation about using them. Marcus moved protectively in front of Rebecca, despite being completely outgunned and tactically outmaneuvered by professional operators. "Dr. Cross, I wondered when you'd finally show up. Right on schedule for your weekly progress assessment and data collection." Cross's facial expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. Recognition mixed with annoyance. The look of someone whose carefully constructed plans had encountered an unexpected and potentially catastrophic obstacle that threatened years of meticulous preparation. Marcus Webb, employee identification number 4793. 3 years of completely exemplary service records. Spotless background checks. Model employee in every measurable category. Cross pulled out a tablet computer, scrolling through what appeared to be a comprehensive personnel file with photographs and detailed behavioral analysis. Until very recently, of course, excessive interest in restricted facility areas, unauthorized access attempts to secure communication systems, highly suspicious behavior patterns that strongly suggest possible industrial espionage activities or worse. The casual threat in his voice was unmistakable. Rebecca finally found her voice despite the shock of seeing a colleague she'd trusted for years revealed as a monster. "Nathan, what is this place? What are you doing to my brother down here?" Cross's smile returned, but it held no warmth or genuine human emotion. "We're advancing the frontiers of human knowledge. Rebecca, we're pushing the boundaries of medical science in ways that traditional ethics committees and government oversight agencies would never approve or understand. Your brother is making invaluable contributions to research that will potentially save thousands of lives in the future. By dying slowly while you document every detail? Marcus's voice carried years of suppressed rage and parental desperation. By being systematically tortured in the name of scientific advancement? Cross shrugged with casual indifference, the gesture somehow more chilling than any direct threat could have been. Medical science requires meaningful sacrifice, Marcus. It always has throughout human history. Your brother volunteered for experimental treatment protocols. The fact that our treatment involves controlled observation of natural disease progression rather than therapeutic intervention is simply a matter of research methodology. Rebecca felt something fundamental break apart inside her chest as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. You're systematically murdering him. You're murdering all of them. Cross nodded, as if she'd made an astute observation about quarterly earnings projections. We're studying the precise biological mechanisms of immune system collapse under carefully controlled laboratory conditions. The comprehensive data we're gathering will revolutionize treatment protocols for immune deficiency disorders worldwide. Your brother's death will directly contribute to saving thousands of future patients. The casual use of the word death in reference to her brother hit Rebecca like a physical assault. You absolute monster! You complete and utter psychopath! Cross gestured calmly to his private security team with practiced authority. I'm afraid this conversation has reached its natural conclusion point. Rebecca, you'll be temporarily relocated to a secure facility while we determine the complete extent of this security breach. Marcus, you'll be processed according to our standard industrial espionage protocols, which unfortunately don't include survival options. But Marcus had spent 3 months carefully planning for exactly this moment and every possible variation. His hand found a concealed maintenance panel hidden behind a false wall section, fingers dancing across emergency controls with practiced precision born from weeks of preparation. Emergency lighting systems activated throughout the entire sub-level facility. Automatic lockdown protocols engaged, sealing off all primary access routes. And most importantly, external communication systems activated, broadcasting live video feeds of everything happening in the corridor to a carefully prepared network of investigative journalists and federal law enforcement agencies. Cross's carefully maintained, composed demeanor cracked completely for the first time in years. What have you done, you ignorant fool? Marcus smiled grimly, finally allowing himself a moment of satisfaction after months of careful planning and desperate preparation. What any father would do when his child's life was directly threatened by monsters wearing doctor coats and hiding behind medical degrees. The security guards moved forward with professional precision, but the emergency lockdown had trapped them as effectively as anyone else. Override protocols required specialized authorization codes that Marcus had somehow obtained during his months of reconnaissance. Rebecca realized with stunning clarity that absolutely everything Marcus had told her was completely true. All of it, the illegal human experimentation, the systematic cover-up reaching the highest levels of corporate leadership, the deliberate murder of trial participants in the name of scientific advancement. But more than that, she understood that her own company, her own board of directors, her own trusted colleagues had been using her as unwitting cover for crimes against humanity that would destroy everything she'd spent her career building. The next 30 minutes unfolded like a surreal fever dream that felt completely disconnected from reality. Federal agents materialized from emergency corridors that Rebecca hadn't known existed. Specialized medical personnel arrived to begin evacuating the sub-level research victims who were still alive. News crews somehow gained access to areas that were supposed to be sealed beyond any possible civilian intrusion. And through it all, Marcus Webb, maintenance worker and father, stood quietly beside her as the pharmaceutical empire she'd built crumbled around them both. Ethan was rushed to a legitimate hospital facility under federal protection, his condition listed as critical but potentially treatable now that actual medical doctors were involved in his care rather than researchers studying his deterioration. Chloe Webb was admitted to the same medical facility, her treatment finally authorized under emergency federal intervention protocols that had been triggered by the ongoing investigation. Dr. Cross and his network of collaborators were arrested on charges that would keep them in federal prison for the rest of their natural lives. But for Rebecca Sterling, the real emotional and psychological reckoning was just beginning to unfold. She stood in the hospital corridor 6 hours later, still wearing the same expensive business suit, still carrying the same designer handbag, watching teams of legitimate doctors work frantically to save her brother and Marcus's daughter. Everything she thought she knew about her own life had been built on systematic lies and deliberate deception. The company she'd dedicated her career to building had been a front for human experimentation. The colleagues she'd trusted completely had been systematically murdering innocent people. Marcus found her there 12 hours later, still standing in exactly the same spot, still staring through the same reinforced window at intensive care units where real medical professionals fought to undo months of deliberate harm. "Chloe's going to make a complete recovery," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from hours of emotional strain. "The doctors are optimistic about reversing most of the damage from delayed treatment. She'll need ongoing therapy, but she's going to live." Rebecca nodded without turning around, unable to trust her voice. "And Ethan?" "He'll survive. They're cautiously optimistic about long-term recovery prospects, but it's going to require months of intensive rehabilitation." The silence stretched between them for several minutes before Rebecca finally managed to speak. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm so incredibly sorry that I didn't know what was happening. I'm sorry I didn't see what was occurring in my own building under my own authority." Marcus studied her profile with understanding rather than anger. "You weren't supposed to see any of it. That was the entire point of their operation. They needed someone with completely clean hands and a spotless public reputation to serve as the legitimate face while they conducted their research in the shadows." "How did you figure it out when I couldn't?" Rebecca asked, the question that had been haunting her since the parking garage confrontation. Marcus's smile held no triumph, only bone-deep exhaustion from months of carrying terrible knowledge. "Because I was completely invisible to people like Dr. Cross and his colleagues. Janitors don't matter to corporate executives. We're part of the background scenery. They discuss classified projects around us because they assume we don't possess the education to understand the implications. They leave sensitive documents on tables because they forget we're literate human beings." Rebecca turned to face him fully for the first time since their world had exploded in that parking garage. "What happens now? Where do we go from here?" Marcus gestured toward the hospital room, where their children were receiving medical treatment that should have been available months ago without federal intervention. "Now we make absolutely certain this never happens again to anyone else's family. We rebuild Meridian Pharmaceuticals as something that actually helps people instead of exploiting them for scientific data. We transform your company into what you always believed it was." The proposition was staggering in its implications and scope. Rebecca Sterling, former CEO of a pharmaceutical giant, exposed as conducting illegal human experimentation, partnering with Marcus Webb, maintenance worker turned federal whistleblower, to create something entirely new from the ashes of corruption. Something that prioritized human welfare over profit margins and quarterly earnings reports. Something that treated patients as human beings rather than expendable test subjects for scientific advancement. "Why would you possibly trust me after everything?" Rebecca asked, the question burning in her chest. "After everything my company did to your daughter, to my brother, to dozens of innocent people, why would you want to work with me on anything?" Marcus's answer came without hesitation or doubt. "Because you genuinely didn't know what was happening. And because when you finally found out the truth, you risked everything to make it right. because Chloe needs a world where this kind of medical nightmare never happens again to any child. 6 months later, Rebecca Sterling stood in the completely renovated lobby of what had once been Meridian Pharmaceuticals and was now the Sterling Webb Foundation for Medical Ethics and Patient Advocacy. The cold marble floors had been replaced with warm hardwood that didn't echo with every footstep. The intimidating corporate lighting had given way to natural illumination from newly installed skylights that made the space feel human rather than institutional. The forbidding security barriers had been completely removed, replaced with comfortable seating areas where patients and families could wait without feeling like unwelcome intruders. Marcus appeared beside her, no longer wearing a maintenance uniform, but rather the simple business attire of someone who understood that meaningful action mattered infinitely more than impressive appearance. The first quarterly report shows we've provided completely free treatment to 47 children with immune deficiency disorders, he said, reviewing statistics on his tablet. Full genetic therapy protocols with no insurance requirements, no demographic restrictions, no corporate profit considerations. Every single child who needs help receives it immediately. Rebecca smiled genuinely for the first time in months, the expression feeling foreign after congressional hearings and federal investigations. 47 children. The exact same number they used for Ethan's dehumanizing test subject designation. Marcus nodded with satisfaction. It seemed appropriate to transform their clinical numbering system into something that represents actual healing and hope for real families. Through the Foundation's new floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see children playing in a therapeutic garden that had been constructed where the executive parking garage once stood. Chloe Webb and Ethan Sterling were among them, their unlikely friendship forged in hospital rooms but flourishing in Colorado sunlight. Both were completely healthy now, living proof that medical science could heal rather than harm when guided by ethical principles instead of profit motives. "Any regrets about the path we've taken?" Marcus asked, watching their children play together with other young survivors. Rebecca considered the question with complete seriousness. She'd lost her corporate empire and executive authority. Her personal reputation had been destroyed and rebuilt from scratch through months of public testimony. Her accumulated wealth had been reduced to a small fraction of its former size, with most of it now funding the Foundation's expanding operations. By every traditional measure of corporate success, she'd lost absolutely everything. "Not a single regret," she said finally, meaning every word. "Not one." Marcus nodded with perfect understanding, watching Chloe teach Ethan how to identify different flowers in the therapeutic garden. They stood together in comfortable silence, observing children play who might not have survived without the conspiracy that had ultimately brought their families together. Sometimes the worst betrayals led directly to the most important revelations. Sometimes losing everything was the only way to discover what really mattered in life. The story that had begun with a desperate shout in a parking garage had evolved into something neither of them could have possibly imagined 6 months ago. A maintenance worker and a pharmaceutical CEO, brought together by circumstances that should have destroyed them both, had instead found a way to transform personal tragedy into healing hope for dozens of families. Their partnership had saved not only their own children, but countless others, with hundreds more to follow as the Foundation expanded its reach. As the sun set behind the Colorado mountains, casting long golden shadows across the therapeutic garden, where children laughed without fear of medical bills or insurance denials, Rebecca Sterling and Marcus Webb understood that family could be discovered in the most unexpected circumstances. That heroes didn't always wear expensive suits or possess advanced medical degrees. That sometimes the most important conversations in human history happened between people who had never been meant to meet under normal circumstances.